On the night of March 24, 1945, on the eastern bank of the Rhine River near Remagen, Germany, one American combat engineer would face a decision that meant the difference between momentum and disaster for an entire Allied advance. Machine gun fire stitched the darkness. Mortar rounds slammed into the riverbanks. German artillery searched blindly through the night. And yet, in those hours before dawn, a single engineer officer stayed at the water's edge, directing the construction of a bridge, 60 feet of exposed, fragile structure, while enemy fire swept the crossing again and again. This was the final barrier before the heart of Germany, and little did they know, what happened next would become legendary. By March 1945, the Western Front had transformed into a race against time. Nazi Germany was collapsing, but it was collapsing violently. The Rhine River, wide, cold, and fast-moving, remained the last major natural defensive line protecting the German heartland. For the Allies, crossing the Rhine was not just symbolic, it was operationally decisive. The unexpected seizure of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen on March 7th had already shocked German high command, but holding and exploiting that crossing required more than one damaged rail bridge under constant artillery attack. That responsibility fell to the U.S. Army's combat engineers. Attached to 1st U.S. Army, elements of the 9th Armored Division and 78th Infantry Division pushed eastward from the Remagen bridgehead. Their progress depended on speed. Armor, trucks, artillery, and infantry had to cross the river in numbers the damaged bridge alone could not sustain. Enter the 51st Engineer Combat Battalion, part of the 11th Engineer Combat Group. Among them was Captain Carl H. Timmerman, but the bridge under fire that night would be overseen by another engineer officer, one whose name would later be etched into official after-action reports and Silver Star citations. These men were not assault infantry. They carried rifles, but their real weapons were steel pontoons, Bailey Bridge components, cables, and raw nerve, and they were about to build a bridge in the open. By 1400 hours, German observers on the eastern bank had already identified Allied preparations. Smoke drifted across the river, but not enough to conceal the activity. At 1600 hours, German artillery opened fire. Shells whistled overhead, splashing into the Rhine or detonating along the muddy banks. Engineers dove for cover, then returned to work. They had done this before, but never under this intensity. As darkness fell around 1900 hours, the temperature dropped sharply. A cold March wind cut through wool uniforms soaked with river spray. Visibility shrank to shadows and flashes. German MG-42 machine guns, positioned on the high ground east of the river, began firing in long probing bursts. The sound was unmistakable, a ripping canvas noise that echoed across the water. By 2100 hours, the situation worsened. A German mortar battery, firing 81mm rounds, found the range. Explosions marched steadily closer to the engineer assembly area. One pontoon was shredded before it could be launched. 2 men were wounded, one seriously. The bridge had to be built anyway. Captain David R. McCullum, a combat engineer officer in charge of the crossing operation, made his decision. The bridge would go up that night, under fire, no matter the cost. Shortly after 2300 hours, the engineers began pushing the first pontoon sections into the Rhine. German fire intensified immediately. Machine gun tracers stitched across the black water, skipping like stones. Mortar rounds landed close enough to rock the pontoons violently. Each explosion sent freezing water cascading over the men. At 000 hours, midnight, disaster struck. A direct artillery hit destroyed one of the central floating sections. The bridge, still incomplete, lurched sideways. Cables snapped. For a moment, it appeared the entire structure would break apart and be swept downstream. Men were thrown into the river. 2 engineers disappeared beneath the surface, weighed down by gear. One was pulled out unconscious, The other was never found. The crossing was on the verge of failure. German fire now focused directly on the bridge site. Flares illuminated the river, turning night into harsh white daylight. Every movement was visible, every silhouette a target. Some officers urged a halt. Captain McCullough refused. Standing fully exposed on the riverbank, he shouted orders over the roar of gunfire. His voice carried through chaos, calm and precise. Sections were repositioned, replacement pontoons dragged forward by hand. For 3 brutal hours, from midnight until nearly 3 a.m., the engineers worked waist-deep in icy water, under constant fire, repairing and extending the structure inch by inch. Fear gripped the men, but so did determination. They understood what failure meant. Without this bridge, the advance would stall. German forces would regroup. Thousands more lives would be lost. At approximately 3:30 hours, just before first light, German fire began to slacken. Whether from ammunition shortages, confusion, or exhaustion, the intensity dropped. The engineers seized the moment. Final decking was laid, cables tightened, anchors driven deep into the riverbed. At 04:15 hours, Captain McCullough stepped onto the bridge himself, testing its stability as shells continued to fall nearby. It held. Minutes later, the first M4 Sherman tank rolled cautiously onto the structure. Its engine noise echoed across the river, a mechanical growl of defiance. The bridge swayed, but did not fail. By dawn, the 60-foot bridge was operational. Armor, infantry, and supply vehicles poured across the Rhine in numbers the Germans could no longer stop. The bridgehead expanded rapidly. Resistance east of the river collapsed within days. What happened next would become legendary, not because of a single charge or firefight, but because one engineer refused to abandon his mission. The cost was real. The 51st Engineer Combat Battalion suffered over 40 casualties during the Rhine crossings, including several killed during bridge construction operations. But their success enabled 1st U.S. Army to surge into central Germany. Within 3 weeks, Allied forces linked up with Soviet troops on the Elbe River. Captain David R. McCullough was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry under fire. Several enlisted engineers received Bronze Stars for valor. Their actions were cited in official Army histories as decisive contributions to the Rhine crossing. The bridge itself would only stand for days, temporary by design, but its impact was permanent. It proved that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is measured in hours endured, orders shouted through gunfire, and steel laid piece by piece in the dark. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.